Why is it that most of the time younger and newer furries bring along the whole coming out as a furry dilemma? But what does coming out as a furry mean? This is a scenario where you typically tell a friend or a family member about the furry fandom, and most importantly, you involving yourself as a furry in question. I generally don't mind these stories. They bring the comfort of acceptance in most cases, and hey, I am no one to deny the happiness that this might bring to you. Yet, there are some aspects that I tend to not fully grasp about the whole coming out as a furry thing. So let's tag along and talk about it. Hi everyone, this is Zaidi the Fox, and welcome to a brand new video. Hey, there's something that needs to be said and that not many understand nowadays. So let's hop along. Yes, much more comfortable. Alright. Now, when we talk about being a furry, we tend to associate the term furry with part of our own identity. And that's a big mistake if you give deep thinking to it. Because this fursuit of mine, this persona, is not my identity. It's just an artistic representation of something that I have created, and therefore, it's a manufactured extension of my own creativity. So, when we talk about identity and being one with your animal persona, well, you might be inclining towards the whole Therian spectrum, which, by the way, I see no issue with and I fully support. But that's not being a furry, and we will not talk about Therians today, will we? Now, why did I have to mention the whole concept of the artistic representation in contrast with the concept of identity? Well, because when we say coming out as a furry, we are technically and indirectly assuming the furry fandom as an identity. And that's a big problem. For this video, I could think of 3 major misconceptions that could arise from the whole, oh yeah, I'm coming out as a furry to my parents thingy. And that could be expressed in 3 different problems. Firstly, this poses a problem because we would be coming out technically as hobby enjoyers, and that has nothing to do with something that defines you as a person. Secondly, you are assuming that being a furry is something questionable, and technically a secret that you feel the need to come clean as a true identity. Which is not, but you still fear your parents' rejection for a hobby, for instance. And thirdly, and in my opinion the most important, you are putting a hobby, aka the furry fandom, at the same level of the whole queer fight and the whole right conquest, which is something that I find, I don't know, a bit unfair. I guess it feels like the whole right conquest being reduced to, hey mom, I like dressing up as an animal, which could sound a bit patronizing if you ask me. Well, in order to start, I would like you to picture the following. You're sitting down at your desk, browsing the internet, and you find art. You like this art, you do research, and soon enough you find yourself immersed in the whole anthropomorphic world. Well, that's how I joined the fandom. This happened to me towards the end of 2009. And it wasn't until 2017 that I talked about it with my mom because, yes, you'll be surprised at this, I wanted a fursuit. Oh yeah, what can I say? Now, don't you think it's a bit, weird, or at least upsetting to go to your mom and say, hey mom, I like this type of art, I love talking to people who dress up as big animals online, and one day, listen up, I want to do the same. I mean, for old-fashioned folks, maybe conservative families like mine, who were brought up in the countryside, yeah, I kinda get the point of you setting down the ground to, in a way, soften the fact that your parents might not understand your style, but that's part of the second point, I guess, so I digress. What I mean is that explaining a hobby sounds typically strange, and if you're still in 2 minds about it, just let me use a different example, but following the same line. So let's say the same message from before, but with a different hobby. Instead of art, let's talk about football. Let's go by the same. Hey mom, I love Manchester City, I love talking to people who debate on lineups, and one day, listen up mom, listen up, I want to attend tryouts to become a footballer. Yeah, what the heck? My mom would be like, I guess, alright, how can I help? And that's key here. Whether it's art, fursuits, or a football field, we are all discussing artistic or athletic features, in this case, of our own. A football team doesn't define who you are, and neither does a fursuit. These are all activities in which we engage in order to have time for ourselves and explore creativity, sports if you follow my football example, and mainly to unwind in our free time. Of course, like footballers do, we can make a free time activity like the furry fandom our main source of income. I mean, you just need to take a look at artists or faucet makers to find out. But that is not your identity either. So there is, in my own perception, no need to come out to anyone as a furry. You just do your life and you enjoy your hobby. Of course, in more traditional context, your parents or close friends might be a little confused with the idea of a big animal, let's say. For example, my mom laughed when I asked for money for a fursuit and encouraged me to start working, but we never assumed this was part of my identity. I mean, it was not a part of me that needed acceptance. It was just a fun activity. I do understand it might be scary for some, and that's why we will talk about fear, which is another factor that makes young furries, for example, feel the need to come out as furries. Of course, the furry fandom is tied to many other subcultures, and it is an artistic way of exploring yourself. Within this fandom, many other minorities find a safe space to thrive and to be themselves without the fearing judging eye of today's society, and that is actually one of the most beautiful aspects of this community. For many, the furry fandom becomes a place where you can not only explore creativity, but you can also develop a strong sense of personality, with your own furry-based humor, and sometimes even find yourself in a community where you feel comfortable. I dare say that the furry fandom might be the path to expressing your true self, something that could feel daunting elsewhere, if you ask me. Because of this fandom, at least in my experience, we feel at ease by creating personas that, in a way, resemble our idealized version of ourselves. We adopt a name which feels much more comfortable than our actual legal name. I mean, I love being called Xylee by my furry friends, and I don't see them using my other name, and because of that, we interact within our own circles. Over time, those spaces start to feel like a small herd where everyone understands the same language. And that is the sense of community that, after thorough analysis, I believe makes you feel in need of saying, hey mom, this is me and I want you to know this about me. But again, belonging to a community doesn't necessarily mean that community is an identity that needs to be revealed in the same way other aspects of our life are. In fact, the reason some people feel the need to come out as a furry might actually come from a very natural and very human basic feeling, and that is fear. But what is it that we fear? Well, I don't believe we are afraid of the fandom itself affecting our lives, because there is nothing wrong with it. But we might fear the wrong perception that we subconsciously believe other people might see against the furry fandom, simply because it might seem strange for a different generation, like our parents, for example. This is particularly linked directly to the idea of the word stigma. Stigma is everywhere, and the furry fandom, at least down here in Latin America, has been quite relevant in the media lately, and unfortunately, it has been ridiculed by the TV. Traditional news and platforms have done a lot of damage to our fandom, be it here or any other country, and that negative stain is likely to live on in all folks. I mean, they will not sit down on the computer and do some research, they just sit down on the couch and watch TV, what can we say? So, in order to tackle this issue, I will bring the words of Canadian sociologist Irving Goffman, who wrote extensively about how people manage what we call the social stigma. And given how we perceive the world and how the outside has treated furries, we might tend to fear that rejection. According to Goffman, when we believe something about ourselves might be misunderstood or judged negatively by society, we sometimes treat that characteristic as something that must be carefully revealed, explained, or even justified. In other words, we prepare for a moment of disclosure. But here's the irony: by framing the furry fandom as something we need to come out about, well, we might intentionally reinforce the idea that it is something questionable in the first place, and the truth is, the furry fandom is just a space where you feel safe and where you feel comfortable. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes our parents or non-furry friends might not understand, and they don't have to either. Why is there then the need of a confession? And that's an honest question I have. And hey, I am not encouraging you to stop being open with your close friends or your family members, but the furry fandom should be something you enjoy, and that should be important just to you. Yeah, parents might not understand, but there's nothing wrong about the fandom, and you should be happy with what you create in this community. I mean, sometimes we create that unnecessary weight, that falls on ourselves because we expect misunderstanding, and the truth is that expectations can turn a hobby into something that suddenly feels like a secret, but that shouldn't be the case. And that brings us to the third point, which is probably the most delicate one in this entire discussion. Or at least that's for me. Okay, good. Now, this last point is the one I personally think about the most when I hear the phrase coming out as a furry. Because historically, the idea of coming out carries a very specific meaning. If you didn't know, the concept comes primarily from LGBTQ+ communities who for decades had to hide their own orientation or gender identity because revealing it could lead to rejection, discrimination, or even risking their own lives. Coming out in that context was never just about sharing a personal interest. I mean, it was about revealing something deeply tied to who you are as a person, something that affects your relationships and your place in society. From my own perspective, I say this not just as someone who is actively observing the conversation, but as someone who has lived through that experience personally. Back in 2013, I came out as gay to my family. The reaction was not very well welcome, you know what I mean, to say the least. It was actually quite hostile. Oh, Jesus Christ. That still makes me shiver, but my mom shouted at me saying I wanted a male son. She was crying, making me feel that rejection in first person. Yeah, this left a big mark in my life, despite the fact that she eventually accepted me and apologized in tears. Years later, we still have a marvelous relationship, but I can't deny the fact that this created a period in my life where I felt completely alienated inside my own home. This sort of apartheid I felt at home during my teen years made me feel a little weird, when I first heard the phrase, I am coming out as a furry to my parents. Hey, don't get me wrong, I do understand that excitement, but coming out has a completely different meaning, at least for me. I am sure that many LGBTQ+ individuals like I do carry a story like this one. I've just shared something very personal that I believe it resonates with many others as well. It's undeniably heartbreaking that there are so many stories of families breaking apart or people just being forced to rebuild their lives after revealing something fundamental about themselves, like their own sexual identity. That's why I feel that placing a hobby or your fandom participation in the same conceptual space as those experiences can unintentionally, and hear me out, unintentionally minimize the historical weight that the phrase coming out carries. Please, don't get me wrong, by no means do I intend to label coming out as a furry as something disrespectful or anything of the sort. Nothing to do with that. It's just a naive misconception that I genuinely believe it had to be addressed because not many people stop and think about it. But that's just me, alright? Thank you. So, in the end, being a furry is simply a creative and joyful way to spend time with people who share the same passion. We go to conventions, we commission arts, and we make long-lasting memories with friends. And none of that requires a dramatic moment of revelation, I believe. So, if you ask me, it only requires the simple confidence of knowing that what you enjoy is harmless, creative, and meaningful to you. The furry fandom doesn't need to be treated like a secret or a confession. It's a pastime, it just brings people together, and if it makes you happy without hurting anyone else, then that's already more than enough reason just to enjoy it proudly. So yeah, at the end of the day, guys, you don't need to come out as furries. You just enjoy yourselves and be happy. I hope you guys have enjoyed today's video, and if you did or have anything to share in line with this video, please let me know in the comments. These debates are the ones I love talking about, so I look forward to reading your insights. Like and share this video with your friends and let them know about it. If you want to, you can subscribe to the channel and keep enjoying more content like this one. So I hope to see you all in my next video, and take good care of yourselves, everyone. Yeah.